Hey everyone, welcome to the episode. With me today is Mr. McCormo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, man. And for me, this is kind of a historic event because back in the very first episode of the podcast, I talked about how I wanted this to be an open community podcast where someone listening to it would have the chance to come on if they wanted. And you are the first listener to come on as a guest, so that's really cool.
I heard that in that episode and thought, maybe I'll get in touch with this guy sometime, which, as you obviously know, that's exactly how it happened. I said, hey, I have some stuff that I know about this genre, and I'm also kind of new to it like you are. So let's talk shop. I think there's some interesting things we could discuss. And so obviously here we are.
That's really cool and kind of refreshing for me because before then I've always been, tracking down my guests and begging them to come on. Well, actually, that's not true. Most of them have been super cool and easy to get on, but I don't know. It's just cool. I feel a little famous, I guess, is what I'm going at. So anyway, so I guess we could start off by talking about what you've been playing recently as far as shmups.
I played this really cool arranged mode for XIII, Arranged 1.7 by Trap15. A friend who has a vertical cab had set it up, and so he let me try it, and I played that for hour and was slaughtered, but it was a blast. It was really, really fun.
Is this arranged mode kind of like a ROM hack of sorts?
Yeah, he was playing it on the board, PCB. But yeah, it's a ROM hack. My understanding is that incorporated some changes to the layout, definitely to the bullet speed and stuff like that. The big change that I noticed is he actually added a weapon select mode.
That's cool.
Rotate your little options between pointing in different directions. And these stage scrolls, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like being able to be up at the top of the screen, shooting down, like that happens. There are portions of the map that are like that. So it was really fun. I like that. How about you?
That's extremely impressive that he was able to pull that off, technically. Yeah, didn't Trap also make the Dodonpachi arrange?
As far as I know, yeah. I saw on his website. I haven't tried that, though.
I tried to get it up and running last night, but I think I was doing something wrong with the ROMs and everything, but I'll get it figured out. So, in addition to XIII, what have you been kind of playing more regularly, would you say?
I've been banging my head against Daiuju on PS2, DOJ. That's kind of my first shoot 'em up. I've once CC'd a handful of smaller ones. I mean, not necessarily lesser known stuff like Thunder Force 3 or Daifukatsu, Resurrection.
Uh-huh.
But as I'm sure the community already knows. But yeah, it's a very difficult game, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Yeah, no kidding. I started with White Label as well on the PS2, and after a few months, I was talking to some people, and they're like, Black Label's easier. I was like, oh, okay, so I'll play Black Label.
Nice.
Now that I've done my one-all Black Label, I'm thinking of going back and doing White Label on the PS2.
I haven't played Black Label, but I mean, even the different modes and arranged of the Dodonpachi games are usually worth trying out and playing, so I have no doubt it was excellent.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of main differences for high score play, but for just clearing and survival, I think the main difference is you get hypers a lot more often in Black Label, probably like almost twice as often. and the bullet speed on the bosses is reduced a little bit.
Okay.
And some of the patterns are slightly different. It's not like a night and day thing, but White Label is noticeably harder, but not like extremely hard compared. They're still comparable, but it's easier. Black Label. As far as the PS2 port, though, how do you feel about that?
Because I'm playing it on a CRT, that goes a long way. The PS2 version outputs 240p to Tate for that port of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Ported by Cave. It was ported by Eureka, and they did a better job than Cave themselves, because Cave handled some other PS2 ports that weren't so hot. But it's excellent. It's an excellent port of the game. I've played it on an actual cabinet and satisfied with the home version when it comes to playing and practicing. It's got enough practice modes to mess around with. Not pure save states, but close enough.
Yeah, I've always been really impressed with the PS2 port of DOJ. I guess the only flaw you could ever say is there's no Black Label mode, but I don't think that even existed when they made the port, so...
Right.
But as far as White Label, I would definitely say it's the definitive way to play it, other than a PCB, I guess, or emulator if you're into that. But console ports, it's superior to the 360.
Yeah.
For sure. Because the training mode in that is really robust. I mean, you can control hyper rank, you control all this kinds of stuff, you can just practice against the bosses, there's stage select, you can control the power-ups. Like, that's actually how I learned most of the game, is playing on the PS2 version.
Even something as simple as letting you skip ahead to the boss would be a novel idea for a shmup practice mode. It's like, do you not know how your own games are designed?
Yeah, I know. And the Black Label on 360 doesn't have that. It only has like a really rudimentary stage select. There's no options. You just basically go into the stage, and you either have the option to go in fully powered up or not powered up. Like, that's it.
That's kind of terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty useless for practice, to be honest. So what I've been playing recently is I've been playing some Battle Garega.
Nice.
That's a very popular shmup on this podcast, and so I figured I'd go for the 1-all in that, or the 1cc, I don't know. I don't think there's 2 loops, so...
Your impressions so far?
I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's very different than a cave shmup, and those are kind of my primary shmups I play. But I'm definitely starting to kind of sink my teeth into it. I remember spending the first 3 days just going through all the ships trying to figure out which one I'm going to play. It's pretty crazy how many different ships there are.
I can empathize with that. It sometimes feels like you'll be cruising through an area, a particular ship, and you're thinking to yourself, geez, this is great. And then you get creamed. So you pick a different one, and then maybe you struggle to even get to that part, and then somehow you get past it, and you're like, oh, wow, this part is way easier with this ships. It's almost like in old Mega Man games where you'd have to pick which stage you wanted to do first based on the weapon because of the later bosses. It's like, hey, you might think that ship is great on stage 1 and stage 2, but wait till it, absolutely tanks on stage 3, and it's the worst pick possible. That's kind of how Battle Garega treats you. It's not very charitable.
I kind of think I've settled into playing Gain. I think that's the ship I'm going to go for. Just because I have the most fun playing Gain, and it's kind of all or nothing with him. At least that's what I found so far, is if you have your swords, you're golden. But if you don't have your swords, you're screwed, kind of thing. Especially in the later stages.
I'm not that great at the game, and so exactly like you described, if you don't have your swords, well, good luck. So
it's over, basically.
Yeah.
These are early impressions because I haven't got the 1cc yet. I'm only kind of in the process. But another thing too is I just got off playing like DOJ and some pretty hard shmups, I'd say. And so when I started up Battle Garega, I cleared the first, I think, 4 stages. My first try, I was like, this 1cc is going to be a piece of cake. I don't know why people think this game's so hard. And then stage 5 comes, I'm like, oh damn. And then stage 6, and you're like, holy shit. And then stage 7, you're like, when does this game end? Good lord.
Isn't there an aspect of, is there any randomization to it? I know some of those older shmups, there is. So tell me.
No, not the stages. Like, the stages don't randomize, not like in Gunbird or anything. But the boss patterns and stuff will be randomized, or what the bosses do will be randomized. And so, like, you never quite know what the boss fights are going to be like. At least the later ones I've found. And Blackheart, on stage 5, the last boss of stage 5, oh god, I fought him with just 1 sword. I think it took me, I'm not kidding, probably 6 minutes to kill him or something. Or 8 minutes. It was a really long boss fight.
though. That almost would be a good way to practice the boss.
Yeah, exactly. I went through his patterns, I think, 3 or 4 times. I was like, holy crap, when does this guy die? Well, I guess to summarize my thoughts, I think the game is really uniquely designed. I think it's excellent. I can understand now why it's so beloved by so many shooter fans, and so I'm looking forward to clearing it. I think, too, one reason why it might appeal to more players, maybe, than something like DOJ or something, it feels a little less linear in a way, where DOJ patterns, you just, like the end of stage 3, for instance, you just need to know where you have to go. If you don't, you just get pushed in the corner and die.
Yeah.
So it just really does become a matter of, in that part of the game, memorizing what you need to do. Whereas in Battle Gorga, it feels like you don't necessarily have to memorize the levels if you don't want to. If you're just good enough, you could just dodge your way through them and blow the stuff up. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know. I haven't gotten deep into stage 6 and 7, so that might change in those stages.
Imagine that you would have to learn some routing, maybe to score really well, or because I know the scoring is bananas because you're fighting against rank constantly. So, yeah, I don't know, but you're right on point with control from a Dota and Pachi game. If you get in the edge, you're just squished.
Yeah, especially stage 3. Oh my gosh, the end of stage 3. I think I talked about it in my commentary. I'm gonna upload, but when I first started playing it, I was like, this part's impossible. I don't even get it. And then I figured out just slowly whittling down the route until it becomes pretty easy once you know where you have to go and stuff.
The game is very sharply designed. It actually will teach you, almost progressively teach you those more advanced elements of shoot 'em ups. You know, if you're approaching the genre for the first time, and you know you're reading stuff in the forums or watching videos, you're like, what is he talking about when he means tap dodging? Or you might grasp what he's doing on the stick, but it doesn't translate to what you're doing in the game, and it does force you to learn its own mechanics as you're playing the game, especially if you're trying to play for score, which I'm not playing for a top score, obviously, but I am actually trying to get a couple 100 million by the time I get my 1cc. I'm not trying to just bomb my way through. I'm learning score as I go. So it slows me down, but it actually is teaching me quite a bit about, in general, how shmups are played at a higher level.
Absolutely. I think even that game, just survival-wise, the game doesn't let you just play and bomb your way through. Especially if you use XIII. That's the one I use.
Yeah, same here.
You gotta know what you're doing.
Yep.
I love that game. It's still my favorite shmup, but, you know, there's still many more out there. I could change my mind someday. So when you're playing a white label, are you trying to, like, chain all the levels, or doing, like, maybe half chaining the levels? I'm just curious.
I am kind of playing for score. The way that I'm approaching it is, it only makes sense that I would play for score at least to a certain point, so that I can get the first 2 extends and then get the third extend on stage 4. I mean, just as a matter of resources, because once you're on stage 5, even just against the final, too many hours now in practice, but even that final boss can eat up. So as you're playing through the game, to learn score so that you can have those resources. It's not even about, you know, getting the top score or challenging the world record. The game does force you to learn score to a certain degree, because if you don't,
yeah, you need those extends.
Exactly.
You gotta have them. Yeah, I got all the extends. I actually talked about that in my run. It's basically I tailored my run to get as many points as I could without really heavily doing a lot of heavy chaining, but also not driving the rank up too high. So it was kind of an interesting process of coming up with my own routing ideas and stuff to keep the rank as low as I can while still getting a decent score to get all the extends and everything. Anyway, so besides playing shmups, I also thought we should talk about what kind of shmup content we're into and hear what you think.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff is piecemeal. Sometimes it's on the forums. Sometimes it's a PDF that someone wrote up, 7 years ago. Sometimes it's on YouTube. I mean, you kind of got to hunt around for some of this information. And I get it. That's how these things go. On YouTube, named Johnny Blitzer, he does a lot of HD compilations of all, just by system. He just compiles out all the footage of all these different shmups that have been ported to all these different things. And then he has some funny videos in there that are just YouTube garbage, to put it and in the fondest terms possible. I mean, this is YouTube we're talking about. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff shmups is from people on the forum, people who've been on your show. Shmup Master Stuff, Jamers 91, Pazzy, Bullet Heaven, SGT Weekly. I mean, these are all pretty good sources, well-known sources for info. Great sources, actually, for info.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of Johnny Blitzer. I'll have to check him out.
The poor guy has like some of his videos. Again, they're just compilations for most of his content, just looking through what came out on those different systems is just even just as archival work is, you know, a nice service to the community, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot to wade through for sure.
I mean, you do a podcast, obviously, but is there other content that sort of drives your own interests or that you look for as a muse to give you ideas or learn about shmups themselves?
Oh, yeah. I'll go through the history of my own kind of content consumption in shmup. So I started off by watching a lot of STG Weekly. I think that was the first shmup content that I really got into. And I actually watched a lot of STG Weekly, probably more than most people. I'd say probably half the episodes I've seen. Like, I'd pick and choose through certain ones, based mostly on the shmups. Like, if it was a shmup I was interested in, I'd watch the video on it. If it was a shmup I wasn't interested in, I probably would pass over it, but...
I'm here.
Yeah, STG Weekly is awesome, the work they did. And then along those lines, too, I watched a lot of Icarus's special demonstrations. Have you seen those?
No.
Yeah, on Icarus's channel, he has this, I don't know if it's a playlist on his channel or what, but he has these videos called special demonstrations that show people playing the games live. Like, there's one of Prometheus playing, I think, DOJ. There's one of this Japanese guy playing DDP. And then I think there's some Battle Garega ones in there too. It's really good. And the production quality is top notch. And then from there, I watched a lot of Jamers' replays and stuff, like a bunch. Because he'd also add in some annotations of, you know, what was going on. And I'd read those and kind of try to get ideas for how to get through the game.
Agreed on both counts. That content from Icarus sounds right up my alley. Jamers and Pazzy both have been a big help in my current... For the same reason, Pazzy will also leave annotations. So I'm with you right there.
Yeah. And, you know, from there, ever since starting the podcast, too, I've got, just through meeting people and stuff, I've got more exposure to, I'd say, lesser-known channels, but ones that are still really cool. Like EX Mosquito, he was actually a guest on one of the episodes. He has a really cool channel where he has a Sega Astro City, and he does replays and arcade game clears and stuff, and films them off the Astro City. That one's really good. Game Boy Guru, he was a guest, and he's doing some like little reviews for shmups and stuff, which, you know, I think that's really cool. And then one day, this guy hasn't been a guest or anything, but one day I randomly came across a YouTube channel called Quantum, and the guy did a Ketsui review that I was pretty impressed by. I thought it was pretty good. And this is a small channel, like, this dude's channel is tiny, so...
Sure.
Check him out for sure. And I think he might be retiring from YouTube. I think he put up some video about retiring or whatever, so... Yeah, his stuff's really good, though. And he'll cover a bunch of different games, but he does cover shmups. I think he does a good job. Like, he definitely knows some stuff. He's not just one of those guys that's like, yeah, it's a shmup, play it, kind of thing. He's talking about the PCBs and everything, so...
It's exactly the kind of content that I enjoy watching, and I think it's the kind of content that we need more of. So, yeah, thank you for the recommendation on...
Yeah, just look up Quantum Ketsui, and then that'll probably lead you to his channel. And then streaming, I've gotten into watching some shmup streamers. Cloudy Music, he's been a guest on the episode. I enjoy tuning into his stream pretty frequently. And then Aquas, he's the guy behind SDG Weekly. He has his own stream, and he does a combination of it of like speedrunning and then shmups. Like he'll go back and forth between the two, so that's really good too.
Some of Aquas' streams, for sure. And yeah, it's always entertaining.
Yeah, and he just did a 1-all or 2-all of Under Defeat the other day. That was pretty awesome. Like, I didn't even really know much about that game before watching it on his stream.
That game is so tricky. To me, when I first saw it, it was like, oh, it's just a generic helicopter game, whatever. But you dig into it, and it's so fun. It's very challenging, but it's very rewarding. And probably the most... explosions of any shmup out there. It's like an 80s action movie, just explosions constantly. I love it.
And the soundtrack, have you heard the soundtrack on that thing?
Oh yeah,
that's excellent. Definitely worth a listen. So is there any more content creators you want to talk about, or we got that pretty much covered?
Move on. No worries.
All right, so the next thing I think we could talk about that I think is a very interesting topic you suggested was kind of talking about more community level, popularity type things with shmups. And one thing you mentioned is the possibility of shmups ever being kind of an esport or in the esports scene and all that.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, depending on who you ask, esports can be a very dirty word. Some people kind of have a disdain for that. But the reality is, esports does drive new people to the genre. And if we're looking at shmups from the lens of the arcade scene, they're with fighting games, with competitive puzzle games, and I would say to a degree with speed running. Not all games that people do speed runs of are arcade games, but a lot are like, Ghosts and Goblins and other similar styled games. So really should be some, even if it's just discussion or trying things out. Like you pointed out, Icarus has footage of live demonstrations. That is exactly the kind of stuff that the shmup genre grow and help people kind of discover it. Not everyone's going to wander to the genre like you and I have, from our own unique gaming backgrounds. So esports stuff, even if it never really moves the needle to the hundreds of thousands or millions, thousand more people into the genre, that why not?
Actually, not too long ago, I read a pretty interesting article. I don't remember what it was. I'm sure if you look up Shmups esports, you'll find it. But it was basically an article written by someone in the esports community or whatever that was talking about how even though Shmups are awesome, they really could never be esports. And the guy did bring up some good points about that. But also, I think some things that I think he was a little short-sighted on. So, if you want to hear, I'll talk about what my thoughts are as maybe some viable ways shmups could be esports and ways shmups, would struggle to be an esport.
Why not? I'm curious to hear, yeah.
Okay. I think the speedrunning community, I'm sure a lot of people are sick of me talking about the speedrunning community, but I think they are the closest analog to ourselves as far as how we would fit into the esports scene because they're single player games and we're single player games. Whereas fighting games, it's really natural for them to be an esport because they're a competitive game. It fits very easily into that genre. But shmups, being competitive in a shmup is a little more tricky because even though you could be competing, it's parallel. You're not competing head to head type of thing. Same thing with speedrunning. The thing is, though, is that speedrunning has been recently embraced into the esports scene. There are speedrunners who are now sponsored by esports teams and they're getting all esports. How else to say it? So shmups could follow a similar path, but I think the unique problem that shmups have is that each game is very specialized, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so let's say, for instance, I'm just going to pick two well-known shmup players. Okay, let's say Prometheus and Jamers are, this is hypothetical, everyone. They each get sponsored to different teams for esports shmupping, right? The problem is that there's only a few games that both of them play, you know what I mean, are well known for playing. And so it'd be tricky to figure out, okay, do we just play DOJ or Battle Garega, or how would we, you know what I mean? How would we choose what venue we would compete? And the speedrunning community had a huge problem with this too, because it's like, okay, we're all going to play Mario 64 against each other and Super Metroid, is that it? And so then the competitions just come down to a matter of, can you pull off your run in a live demonstration or can't you? There isn't that kind of meta game like fighting games have, you know what I mean?
I think those problems they've been discussed quite a lot. They're valid problems. Speedrunning community itself is taking a game and saying, hey, here's something we don't normally do, and then making a spectacle out of it. Now, the divide between will people watch it on YouTube and Twitch and is it an esport? There is a divide there. So I'm not strictly arguing just for esports, but what is standing in the way of the shmup community or people who have already mastered these games finding a similar outlet? The live demonstrations, I think, is excellent, whether it's a game they're new to or a game where they have to do their run within 1 hour. I'd like to see more co-op stuff. Co-op is a dirty word in shoot 'em ups because it conflicts with the objective of scoring as high as you can against the hardest challenge you can. set the dip switches to ultra hard, lives to 0. You have a half an hour to score as high as you can as a pair. I mean, you can make up different ways to compete with one another. In my opinion, it's the insistence on shooting for just those 1 credits or just those big competitive traditional head-to-head things, maybe closing ourselves off from other opportunities that people would like to watch online. I mean, people
Yeah, I agree completely.
play games badly and get laughed at and 15 million views. I'm not, recommending that PewDiePie goes play shmups, but areas of the community that we could maybe push into more to encourage that competition or encourage that cooperation beyond just, hey, buddy, backslap, you got a 1 credit, good job.
Yeah. And I actually am on the same page with you with that completely. Like you say, because especially if we're just trying to, again, with eSports, for instance, if we're just trying to convert our regular way of playing shmups into an eSports format, it's really not going to fit that well. But like you say, there are some ways we could, change things up and fit shmups into an eSports format. And I've been kind of brainstorming, and I came up with an idea, and I'll share it with you. It's basically based off of, have you heard of Link to the Past Randomizer?
Yeah, it's kind of like an emulated environment that sets up the rooms differently each time, is my understanding.
Yeah, basically what it is, it's a ROM hack of Link to the Past that each time you play it, it'll change item locations, it'll change all these variables,
right,
but in a way that it is guaranteed you can still clear the game. Like, you can still get through it, but it's just going to be different every time you play. And what's going on right now in the speedrun community is this is hot, the new hotness right now. Forget traditional speedruns as far as, races and stuff. Link to the Past Randomizer is really hot right now, and they're playing it competitively. So what they'll do is they'll have a competition. They'll get 4 runners or 4 players to show up to the competition. They'll pop in a new version of the randomizer. None of them have played it. And then compete. Say, okay, go. And none of them know what they're going to get. They can't memorize it. They can still use all these different strategies that they've learned by playing randomizer, but, each time's a unique experience. And so I've been thinking about that in terms of shmups, and I feel like there's 2 ways maybe we could fit it into an esports model. The first would be we do exactly that. We get someone like Trap15 or some ROM hacker to get a bunch of really good shmups. Battle Garega, Dodonpachi, DOJ, Ketsui, Gwenge, just a lot of maybe some Psycho stuff, strikers in there. And they make this ROM that will randomize elements and stages of the game, and then you get players to show up, and let's say this ROM has, dozens and dozens of different shmups melted together, and then you go in and play, and each time you play, you don't know what stage you're getting. The shmups will be randomized. And so then it comes down to your knowledge of each game and kind of using that throughout the competition. That's what I came up with anyway.
That sounds excellent. There's something similar that I've played in the past. Played a kind of ROM, kind of MAME hack. I think it's a little bit of both, called Multi-Bowl. And what the creators did is they took a bunch of early 90s MAME compatible arcade games, and using save states, they would clip to wherever they wanted their challenge to begin, and then the emulator, which was hacked, would select it randomly. So you had, right, I don't know if it was like 150 or 200. It was kind of like WarioWare.
Right.
But essentially, he cobbled it together with save states, and I think he actually would send he would send text instructions to the screen using the MAME maintenance mode emulation that is typically on arcade cabinets. Something really backwards like that. But anyway, yeah, that would make total sense for shmups, because again, the skills you bring to the table, not your memorization of the routes, is really what will allow you to succeed or fail there. I think that'd be amazing. I'd watch it. You put it on a streaming service, I'd watch it.
See, that's a game format that could involve some sort of metagame where, okay, let's say that this is called the Cave Randomizer. It has all of Cave's really good games in this randomizer, and and different arranged modes and stuff. and you get a group of players, and a person's like, oh, I'm really good at DOJ. I don't even need to practice that, but I'm going to practice Ketsui. And then you get another player who's like, well, I'm really good at Gwenge, so I don't need to practice that, but I need to practice Dengun Feveron. And so all of them are focusing on different aspects of the games. And then when they go to play, it comes down to who's the most solid overall, who can do it all, basically. Who has the most strengths in all the games. I think that would be an interesting way to approach it, rather than how we approach shmups now, where it's a matter of specialists, where this one guy has played Battle Garega for 25 years or whatever, however long, 20 years, I don't even know how long it's been out. And this guy's like the Battle Garega guy. He can't be beaten. But then you have a competition where you put him against, he'll destroy everyone in Battle Garega, but now he's got to play these other shmups too, kind of thing. That was my idea anyway.
I agree. There's value in seeking out ways to make the genre more competitive. And maybe it's not by copying exactly what other genres do. I agree with that. I don't want it just to turn into head-to-head shmupping all the time. But be some inspiration into these other ideas. It would be fun. It would be the kind of content that has driven growth for other retro video game genres. And if it flops, whatever. I mean,
everything flops basically, so there's not really to lose. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
As far as outside appeal, I can personally attest to this. Like, the shmup community is super supportive of itself, and we're lucky for that. But outside communities don't care about us very much.
Right.
Fighting game players. I think fighting game players are a little easier to get to come over to shmup, because that's where I came from, and I actually know quite a few people who come from that background. But yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is there's no harm in trying something new. Definitely not. I was going to ask you about how you feel about competitiveness in the shmup scene and ways it could be helpful, ways it could be harmful.
Touched on a lot of things that could be done to increase competitiveness. You brought up how you have the Battle Garega guy. On the one hand, I do want there to be people who are known, even by name, as the Battle Garega guy, the Dodonpachi guy. Now, you and I might be able to fill in some names there, but for a newcomer, there's really no one who they might be able to point to and say, unless they themselves dig into videos or dig into forum posts or go look at obscure world records or whatever. So I do want to see more of that. That's not inherently competitive. I think it's just promoting the exceptional players in the community. But like you also pointed out, why not get these people clashing more often? 1CCs are extremely, extremely difficult. They demonstrate that you've at least to a certain level. There's always more, of course, that you can master, but it is a certain level of mastery that is extremely narrow. It really is narrow. These are not games that even 0.1% of the gaming population can N1 credit. Now, I'm not saying they can't.
No
I'm not saying they can't. They can't if they don't want to. I'm just saying that they don't. No one really sits down and 1CCs these games. At least, not compared to the people who might sit down and get the platinum in Dark Souls, or get all the achievements in similarly difficult game, by reputation.
Right.
Arguably the most difficult, and yet there is no reputation. There's kind of a disconnect there. It's like we're leaving the hardest games on the table, and we're streaming, the latest popcorn. No disrespect meant to modern games, of course, but there is a strange disconnect there for sure.
Oh, yeah. And what's funny? This is a little bit of a tangent, but you know what's really annoys me? Is whenever you watch YouTube, like general YouTubers, and they do videos like the top 10 hardest games. There is never a shmup on those lists, ever. Like, they never say XIII, the second loop or something. They don't say that stuff. It's like Battletoads or Ninja Gaiden. Dude, I beat Ninja Gaiden in 2 days. On this. That's nothing compared to getting a clear or 1-all in DOJ or anything like that. But it's just funny. I think there's just, that, like you said, this disconnect where everyone knows they're hard, so they just exclude them. Don't even bother talking about them, because we know these are really, really hard. It's pretty crazy, actually.
Reputation is something that the community can do anything to turn around. I mean, we all know that's how people tend to view shmups. They're short, they're just a couple levels long. Who would want to spend hours upon hours practicing a game that's only 30 minutes long? Nothing controversial about me saying that. We all know that's the general reputation about that.
Mm-hmm. I think one problem is that just the way shmups are played isn't in the general skill set of the average gamer. Like, for instance, Ninja Gaiden is actually a really good example. Ninja Gaiden is hard, but it's a platformer, and 98% of the gaming population have played platformers. So when they want to give themselves a challenge, they'll play Ninja Gaiden. It's hard, but it's also comfortable for them because they're used to playing platformers, Whereas you throw someone in a bullet hell, they have no idea what they're doing. They feel completely overwhelmed, and they just like, it's not even worth playing. Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good point. I didn't think of it that way, but there's this terminology in shmups that may be foreign to them. Even the words we're using in videos or in articles or whatever, learn those higher level skills. Again, tap dodging. What the heck does that mean? Micro dodging versus macro dodging. You can find these answers. You can dig around. I'm not saying that the community is holding everyone at arm's length and keeping the secrets to themselves. But for a newcomer who could just as easily boot up a stream of Fortnite and play that game instead, there's some cloudiness between them and all this rich information that'll help them get better. They literally got to learn brand new gaming skills. You're absolutely right there, and that's a problem.
And I think that's where my theory of why fighting game players might be an easier convert is because third strike players or, people who play a lot of fighting games, they had to learn, at the very least, how to handle a stick, how to play a game with lots of really complicated inputs and directions and fast reactions. So you put them in a shmup, and they have the general skills to at least handle themselves a little bit. Whereas, I guess a gamer who, for instance, just plays Dark Souls. I love Dark Souls. No shade towards that game, but the skills you learn in Dark Souls are not going to translate very easily into a shmup.
Agree. Say that the people who are really into puzzle games may have even more crossover than the fighting game genre. Now, don't misunderstand.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm a huge fighting game fan, and I would love for more fighting games fans to get into it. But the spatial orientation, I mean, honestly, shmups they shouldn't be called shoot 'em ups. They should be called dodge 'em ups. They are interactive mazes. The only reason why you're shooting makes the guys at the top shoot less maze at you. But that's really the game. You're trying to dodge through a maze live. And that, to me, has a lot more analog to a rhythm game or a puzzle game than it does to a fighting game.
Oh, I agree.
And so, yeah.
The only issue there is puzzle game communities and rhythm game communities are equally as small as ourselves, whereas fighting game community is massive, I guess is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely with you there. Really what needs to happen, and I think the rise of retro is maybe causing this to happen inadvertently, but I'm noticing kind of a rising unity between people who play, let's just call them arcade games. Doesn't mean that you have a cabinet. It doesn't mean that you even call them arcade games, but there are people who are bleeding in between individual fighting games even, who might have only stuck to one or two, and now they're bleeding between different disciplines. I play fighting games, but I also really love Puyo Puyo Tetris or whatever you're playing. I've seen fighting game players do Puyo Puyo Tetris or Land Maker or Magical Drop 3. I mean, these are games that have some crossover. So the gold is in them thar hills, you might say, but we just have to go out and get it as a community.
My theory for this, because I'm drawing on my own personal experience, is fighting games have really poor single-player content, other than like practice mode or arcade mode a little bit, but you don't get fulfillment playing fighting games single player the same way you do multiplayer. And so for me, what was happening is that I was kind of losing competition in some of my favorite games, and I was feeling a little burned out, honestly, on competition. I've been competing for years, and it gets tiring after a while. So I wanted a nice, engaging, single-player experience that also had that intensity of a fighting game, and I found it in shmups. And so that could be another saving grace for us, is that fighting game players just get tired of competition after a while and want a way to kick back, whether that's playing puzzle games or shmups or something like that.
I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with fighting game tournaments and stuff like that, but even for someone like me who follows that stuff through articles or online, the side tournaments offer a nice open space for that kind of stuff. Now, I know that I'm not saying anything profound here. I've heard plenty about people bringing shmups to fighting game tournaments or trying to get other people engaged. So I'm not, saying, "Hey guys, here's an idea." I just want to acknowledge that, what you're describing, that community get a little bit burned out on fighting games. I've noticed it in myself. I've noticed it even in my buddies. Like when my buddies and I are playing fighting games, one of us is whomping on the other for too long, it
Yes,
can
yeah.
sometimes burn you out. So having that as a similar experience in terms of the intensity, but not similar in terms of the emotional
Head-to-head
investment,
nature.
shall we say?
Yeah, head-to-head nature, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely elbow room for that. I agree.
That kind of brings me to what I wanted to talk about the next subject, which is how competitiveness would work in a shmup scene rather than in comparison to something like a fighting game scene. And I think there is a difference between how it should and would work between shmup players versus fighting game players. But do you have any thoughts on that before I yammer on?
I'd like to hear what you have to say. I mean, I've kind of made my own stance clear. I think there's a lot there. I don't necessarily have the answers. I just have the fuzzy little boundaries of this, what could be done. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Okay, so even back in some of my early interviews with Eaglet in the 4th episode, he was talking about when he was first getting into shmups. He ended up really getting into them because there was a local arcade where he and this other player were going back and forth trading high scores on the arcade machine. And that kept him coming back and playing because he'd get a high score, and then this other guy would come in and beat his score, and he'd want to climb over, and they go back and forth like that. And I think that is a good example of healthy competition in shmups, and like the kind of competition we'd want to look for, where it's like a rivalry type thing. In fighting games, personally, I've had this too, because you're head to head in the moment, there's a lot more salt and a lot more, I guess, aggression kind of thing, which sometimes is a lot of fun and sometimes, it actually sucks. So as far as the shmup community, I don't think that would work as well. Like, let's say me and this other guy were trading high scores in some shmup at the local arcade, Raiden 2, for instance, and I take the fighting game approach where he's playing and I'm like yelling stuff at him and like kicking the cabinet and being like, "Come on, bitch, what's wrong with you? Oh, you died. Why didn't you bomb there?" Or whatever. Like, how fighting game players do. I don't think that would work at all. I think that would be, the guy would just quit or be like, "This guy's a nutcase." Whereas in fighting games, that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. So I think more of like a healthy back and forth rivalry would be better for shmups. I guess I could go on, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Mentioned in there that I have a personal experience with fighting games, just in my local circles, we'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're into fighting games. Which one do you recommend?" Or what do you recommend getting into? People at work primarily, because I work in a tech industry, so I've got a lot of like-minded
That's
nerds
cool.
as well. So every time though, if you want to get into fighting games, you need to find at least one other person who will play them with you, and it's other factors into someone falling in love with fighting games, but to me, that really is the biggest one. And to a degree, I'd say the same is true for shoot 'em ups. Whether it's the rivalry like you described because you're fighting over high scores, or just maybe people tackling a game at the same time or tackling two separate games, these games were built with high scoreboards. And even though, yes, it's a rudimentary way to compete, it's how they were designed. So when you happen to have one or two or three or 10 people on your local scene, that's how a local scene is made. There are still people who are chasing high scoreboards at their local arcades. You know why? Because that's fun. That's how the games were designed. Now, maybe you're not sharing that score worldwide, But as long as the local, loosely knit group of competitors are keeping that in mind, who cares? Chasing high scores is how the games are designed, or even just grinding out the games together and having that camaraderie. That is how the games are designed. Emphasis on the local aspect of it. I think that's a huge part. Online through Shmup forums. A lot of this information is online. People do podcasts and videos. The local stuff tremendously, in my opinion. Yes, make it competitive. I mean, I think people need to be more competitive and kind of call each other out. But even just finding a buddy and saying, "Hey, man, I'm really getting into this, shmup that I got on the PS4." I mean, who cares if it's even in the top shmups ever made, even if it's just a mediocre one. Find a buddy and get them into it. That's my opinion on it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree completely. And okay, so I'm gonna cut this out. So I just feel bad because I feel like I'm bullying this interview more than I usually do. Like I'm talking way more than I usually do.
Dude, that's on purpose because I've done this kind of stuff before too. So like, don't take it the wrong way, but I am specifically like turning questions back on you. I am like asking you, what do you think?
Okay, I just don't want you to feel like I just took over the interview or anything. So. Okay, so speaking of, like you said, the local rivalries and local scenes, I agree 100%. That is the best, because with fighting games, I have a local scene, and that keeps me playing them and competing and stuff, is because of the local scene. The issue, though, with shmups is that local scenes are much more rare and hard to come by. Like, they are a gem if you have one. Right. Cherish it if you have one, because, like me, I don't have one. There's no one besides me in my area. I think even in the Boise area, maybe there might be someone else, but that I know of, I'm the only one who plays shmups. Like, seriously.
The small genre.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that we do have, though, is our online community, right? The shmups forums, the Discord, if you want to get into that, but, all these different online venues we can meet and interact with each other, just because space is an issue between us. You and I, we're miles and miles apart from each other.
Yeah.
So, anyway, what I've been thinking about, though, is there's a little bit of a problem, I feel, with how we are currently interacting with each other when it comes to scorekeeping and competition, I guess you could call it that. And so I've come up with an idea, and by the time this episode is posted, I'll probably already talk to the shmup community about this idea anyway, so this isn't breaking news at this point. But my idea has been, and this could be a good avenue for me to get, to hear my more personal thoughts on it, is when I first started, I'll just start with my own experience. When I first joined the shmup community, I didn't have any kind of intentions of getting high scores or getting on leaderboards. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I doubt many people actually do, to be honest. I think a very few people join the shmup community with the goal in mind to get a world record or something. Like, I'm sure they're there, but they are a major minority. I'd say the majority of us join the shmup community because of our passion for the genre and for our interest in playing for score, but not our need to, dominate competition or anything like that. And so the problem, I think, is that when I first got my first clear of Dodonpachi, I knew it wasn't a great score by any means, but I was like, well, I might as well post the score, why not? And so I went and looked at the Dodonpachi scoreboard at the time, and on there were world record holders, Prometheus and all these world record holders. And there's actually a cutoff on the thread that was like, if your score is below this, don't even bother to post it. And my score was definitely below that. And I was like, well, I guess I won't bother to post my score. I understand why it's there. I understand why. I'm not trying to throw shade at the guy. My feelings weren't hurt. It's because, the dude doesn't have the time to filter through the thousands of Dodonpachi 1-alls, or whatever, that aren't significant. So I understand that, because the purpose of that thread wasn't community involvement. It wasn't getting people to play the games for score. It was to record the high scores. So that makes sense. I'm not trying to criticize anyone. But the problem with that on a community involvement level is that people like me become completely disinterested for really playing for score, because I have no hope of ever getting a world record, or I don't have even an interest in doing that. So what do I do with my score? Nothing. I just forget it and move on and play a different game and try to get a 1-all or something, right? So I've been thinking, the problem with that though is that we're spending hundreds of hours, I was at least, invested in these games, and there's no real way to show our accomplishments off to each other, right? I mean, we can mention, I got a 1-all on Black Label, and I can meet someone else on the forum who said, oh, I got a 1-all on Black Label too. And maybe we could trade our scores back. Oh, I got this score, I got that score. But I feel like there's no community there, you know what I mean?
I think you've hit on something that is plain to see, and it's not really about criticizing. You've got people who, by no fault of their own, if not 1-alls or 2-alls. You have people who interact with the community on a regular basis who are genuinely national record holders or world record holders. So special. It really is. You don't get that in very many hobbies. But at the same time, if one of the hardest things you can do as a newcomer to the genre, I mean, really, one crediting is hard. One crediting is at least a couple weeks of investment, if not months, for someone who's new to the genre. I don't care how good of a gamer you are. If you are genuinely new to this genre, you've got a long road ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you go reach out to this forum or this, let's say a YouTube channel or a Discord or whatever, and you say, "Hey, I finally did it. I got a 1cc," and you're bursting with excitement. You can't wait to tell the person who produced that YouTube video that helped you get through that certain difficult part that they were influential. Now, obviously, I'm being a little bit exaggerative here, but there is that hope that oh, cool. I'd like to show off to the community what I've done, even though I'm fully aware it's not a world record or even a local record. And the community they're not snide or dismissive or rude. I've never seen that happen. But there's also not much more than a backslap, and then we're all back to our individual cabs. Nice job, kid. I'm working through a different game entirely. So if you don't mind, again, I'm being exaggerative, but that is the question, because these games are being played solo. No one's saying, hey, you know what? I bet that I could get a better score than you at this other game. Let's both dive into it together. Yeah, I just don't necessarily see that. So I agree with you I agree with your observations.
Yeah. And again, I hope it didn't come across that I'm throwing shade at anyone, because I've been there too with fighting games, for instance. I've gotten to a certain level in fighting games where I can play for a day and never lose a match. And I get to a point where, my friend will show me, oh, check out this replay of me playing this guy. And all I can see are the flaws. I'm like, dude, that's awesome accomplishment, but, all I can see are the flaws. So it's not that interesting to me, right? But if I rewinded back in time to 3 years ago, when I was around that same skill level, it would be interesting for me to watch, right? Because we were peers. And so I think that's the problem I'm trying to get at here, is that peers aren't able to find each other very well, as the current record holders are now. The top players can find each other because they all have recorded records and they can go back with each other and they're each other's peers. But me and you, for instance, we probably could have a similar skill range, but we don't know because there's no way for us to know, right? Unless I individually reached out to you and was like, here, show me some of your replays, I'll show you some of my replays, and we'll see, we'll compare, right?
It's very funny that you mentioned that, because just the other day I was practicing some DOJ and I had a pretty nice run. I was happy with myself. I got before the end of the second stage, so that was pretty, 30 mil. So I was pretty happy about that. And I'm cruising through, and then I think I just got distracted and died. And I thought to myself, I wonder if that's even a good score. I know that there's videos that get 30 mil before the end of stage 1 because they're chaining it perfectly and all that. So I know the upper limit, but is 30 mil by the end of stage 2? Is that okay? Is that quite good? And like you pointed out, that content simply isn't available. I've looked for it, man. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I've literally looked up, hey, what's a good beginner score for DOJ, and that kind of stuff is either scarcely out there or not out there at all.
Right. And so I'm not one to point out problems and not come up with solutions. So here's my solution anyway. So what I'm thinking would be really helpful for our scene is something that the speedrunning scene also does. I got some inspiration from them. And that's a ladder leaderboard where it's open. The concept behind it is to be open and welcoming and to feel like it's not really curated. Do you know what I mean? Like right now, when you look at the scores for games like Dodonpachi, doesn't matter, any shmup, it feels when you're going through those high scores that those scores are curated, right? All scores are curated, but it feels like they're curated when you look at them. So we actually need to change something fundamentally, right? To where I could post my shitty score to this leaderboard, but it would be among 500 or there's not that many probably, but like 20 other shitty scores, and it wouldn't be weird. It'd be like, oh, there's Mark's score among other one-alls, and then at the top would be the best players. So basically what I'm arguing for is a ladder system that's open to everyone. Their scores are not just in a bubble. There's also video with the score, just like the speedrunning community does. Like, for instance, right now, if you go onto speedrun.com, look up Super Mario 64 and start scrolling and just keep going down, you will find a horrible Mario 64 speedrun by yours truly at like 200, 300 place or something, right?
Sure.
But it's not embarrassing because there's 300 people above me and like 400 people below me. I think that would really benefit the shmup community because then we could, let's say you did a Mario 64 run and you posted it, and I looked, and you were 3 places above me, I'd be motivated to be like, you know what, no. I can get past you. And so I'd improve my run and climb up the ladder and try to beat you. And this would be a way for us mid-level players and lower-level players to compete with each other. We're not going to be, probably very few of us will ever get to the point where we're at the top of the list, but we would have motivation to at least improve our scores and communicate with each other and, be more invested in the games.
I agree. One thing that you could do to meet that aim, have an open ladder leaderboard, and maybe not in every particular case, or just do both. You could have basically monthly ladders. Now, we were talking about eSports earlier. That term monthly ladders is just very, very common in different eSports. So we are kind of getting back into that topic. But do a monthly ladder, whoever's handling the thread or the Discord channel or however we're keeping track of it, you say, okay, last month, so-and-so posted at the top. Here's the new open ladder. You can post anywhere on there. It'll be open until this date, 31 days for, 30 days from now, whatever, end of the month. It gets not erased, but it gets cast aside each time. So even if you posted top last ladder, not only might your score get surpassed, but you might just not be on the board this month because you didn't play it this month. So you want to talk about community participation. Yeah, you might have done a 1-all 2 years ago because you're a vet in the community and you enjoyed the game and you've moved on to other things. But how's your score looking recently? If you got young bloods who are coming up and showing you how it's done, maybe that'll generate some interest from the veteran players to either brush up their skills or show us all how it's done and cream everyone's scores. In either case, I think the community wins to have some sort of open ladder where it's not like you're excluding top players. If anything, we would be lucky to have top players throw their play and, throw a fresh play into the hat. But fresh play. can really get is kind of doing a shmup of the month, which I know a lot of communities will do, and then maybe kind of sort of getting some interest into that. Shmup of the month is good, but you still have the issue of people not necessarily getting into the game. So a more permanent ladder does offer something distinct from just doing a shmup of the month or just doing like a monthly ladder. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, there's only one complaint that I could, or problem that someone might bring up, but it doesn't actually apply to shoot 'em ups. And that is, well, if you have such a if you have a live ladder in such a huge community, you'll just have thousands of people just like trickling at the bottom, just constantly adding stuff. Especially if it's a forum, it means that a person has to go manually update all those, and it's too much work. But like you've already pointed out, we don't have tens of thousands of people, the shmup forums, or flooding the various content that the community produces. Excellent content, but again, we just don't have 400,000 people tuning in every week to watch these videos. And so I don't think there's much of a risk of some ladder getting overwhelmed by, hundreds, if not thousands of entrants. At least not for a little while. Like let's offer it out there, and maybe it helps build the community, maybe it doesn't, but it's not going to get stampeded. There's no risk of that.
Yeah. And I guess explain some more technical details of the ladder. That would be helpful for kind of figuring this out, because I've thought about that too. My first one is, ideally, if this worked out, I would want it to be built into the website in a similar way. If you look at the speedrun.com ladders, they're not forum posts like we do now. What they are is they're like a web app of some kind. You know what I mean? If you go to speedrun.com, you'll see
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's an interactive list. It's not like how we do now where people are literally posting scores. That organizes everything and has different tabs. It's actually pretty nice.
I have some insight there, actually. I have made websites in the past, and I do have an understanding of the back end where, with databases and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Google in particular, just, another thing that would streamline what you're describing. Google will actually let you, if you're using their sheets, Google will let you dump that straight to the sheet. So conceptually, I totally get what you're saying. Conceptually, you could even skip a step and have Google dump the results of the survey to the spreadsheet, while the spreadsheet has built-in logic to automatically sort upon new entry, or maybe someone just goes there and clicks the sort button.
Yeah.
So you can even save yourself a step where no one is doing clerical work of adding the score and switching it from sheet to sheet. You can even just have Google do it for you. So anyway, continue though. I wanted to offer that as
that's definitely what I was shooting for. I have some coding knowledge, but not with websites. Like, that's my area where I am completely lost. But I know I kind of have an idea of how it works. And yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like, this would be a much more efficient way than our current method of, actually literally posting them, What I want is for every score on the board to have a video right there with it. So you read the score, you see what they did, and you can watch it. And there's a number of reasons why I feel that way. The first is that it is the year 2018, and there really is no barrier for us putting up videos of our runs. There's some barriers, but they're easy enough to get around. The second is that, scores just by themselves do not tell the story of what the one run was. For instance, I could put up a score of this number. The guy below me could put up the score, and he's like 300 or 4,000 points less than me. But when you watch the runs, we did completely different strategies. We did all these different things. And so I feel like to give the runs kind of context and meaning, there needs to be a video attached to them. What do you think?
My thoughts are mixed. From the perspective of, it's an excellent idea and it's a difficult idea, because the technology isn't there. It's because some of these games are not as easy to run anymore. So that you're kind of taking a hit to the overall mission goal and ladder that people can participate from all around and see it as something like, hey, I could put my score up there. I'm not saying it trashes it. It's just that is the big conflict I see.
Right. Well, it's good to hear your thoughts.
Only main issue I see, I don't think it's negligible, but I don't think it's impossible to overcome if there was a way to record it, or maybe even have like a casual ladder, or maybe you could submit like a photo of like the final high score after you game over? I don't know. I mean, I don't think there is a good solution because absolutely correct. Having real footage of these plays, having that to compare, even just as a way to get more content out there for people to share their playthroughs and really exhibit how they've done. You're absolutely correct. That is a part of building the community and giving to participate in. I think it's necessary. You pointed it out. We've got to have a way to random videos and playthroughs and scores scattered across forums. I mean, yeah, at best we have world records, but there's got to be a better way. A live ladder with video attachment. It's like, fine, videos are hard to take sometimes. I could make that argument, but otherwise, what's your solution?
Yeah, and I guess I was a little firmer than I actually am when I was a little bit passionate there, because I also see there are some barriers to that idea. For one, though, I have to say, if you're playing on emulator, you're going to have a really hard time convincing me you can't get video, because in the worst case scenario, you're playing on like the worst computer ever, you could just save the replay file, submit it to us, and we could extract video from the replay file. So if you're on emulator, I do not see this being a problem. The problem comes up is if you're playing on original hardware or on older consoles, right? Because capturing video from that is much trickier, right? And so that's where I get, I guess, divided, right? Because let's say someone wants to play XIII on the SNES, right? And that's a casual game, and they really don't have an interest in recording the runs. There's no replay feature of that game. So yeah, that becomes trickier, right? Maybe the requirement for video is too tough.
Well, the other thing you could do is this. I mean, some ladders will do it, but you'd have to decide, where you fall on curating it. But you could just say either you're attaching a video or you're attaching 2 or more photos, one demonstrating that you're playing on original hardware and the other a photo of the screen with your high score.
Yeah. See, I guess one thing I have to clear up, I guess that might be, especially with these days, I actually have no interest in proving legitimacy or proving that your score is legit. I don't care. Like, at this point, the shmup community is so small. If someone wants to cheat, they're going to cheat. And I don't think anyone has the time or energy to really go through and make sure you're not cheating, especially with like emulators and stuff. I mean, you can get away with that. There's no way to prove you cheated, right?
With all the genres, though, I mean, I've heard concerns about cheating or, cooking up runs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But doing it for a shmup has got to be one of the hardest. It would be almost the achievement itself, because these are games that have very minute running tallies of score. They have very minute movements that you have to dodge through things. It's like, even if you stitch together save states, even if you did that, all it takes is one stray bullet. All it takes is one strange stitching of the save state, and suddenly the ship has twice as many pixels as it should, or the bullet pattern just kind of phased out there for a second. I honestly think that cheating would be much more difficult in shmups compared to any other genre.
Yeah. And because there are, I'm sure, really clever ways to cheat in shmups, especially in emulator for sure. But at this point, what are you really achieving? I mean, if you do that and you go out of your way to do that and falsify video, I don't see a way of really stopping that. And you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get sponsored. You're not going to get famous. You're just going to get a higher score on the board. And that's that. And people might watch your run and be like, what the hell's going on here? But anyway.
There's very little incentive for such a small genre. And, really, if that problem appears,
we can deal with it in the future, right?
By going off the history of these things, that problem will appear if the genre becomes much more popular than it currently is. There will be cheaters, because then people will be flooding into the genre saying, hey, I want my stab at it. And some clever kid will stitch together a emulated save state play run. So it is a future problem maybe, but right now, it's not a problem.
It's not. And I'm just bringing this up because I just want to say that's not why I want video for these runs. That's actually not why. It's because I want documentation of the run so that your peers can know what you're doing and copy you or learn from you and compete with you. Because let's say, okay, let's put a scenario here. Me and you are competing for a high score in white label. I decide, you know what, I'm going to put him in his place. He's my viewer, and I'm going to show him who the real player is or something like that, right?
Right.
And so we're going back and forth on the board, but there's no videos, right? Neither of us are cheating, though. We are both straight up. But there comes a point where I post this score, and it's like really good, and you want to beat me, and you're looking at like, what did he do? What's the difference? You know, what the hell happened here? And I could say, well, on stage 3, I didn't drop the chain or whatever, but it adds more to the experience where I put the score and then there's my replay and you're like, okay, what the hell happened here? And you watch it. Oh my gosh, he's chained stage 3 without dying. How do you do that? You know what I mean?
I do. There's so much value to it. I agree with you there.
That's the main reason why I want videos. I could see why maybe that requirement might be too stiff because maybe it's just too hard in certain scenarios, but that's where I'm coming from though. It's not. Let's say I decide, forget it, there doesn't have to be videos. I wouldn't require anything then. Just post your score. If you lie, but maybe upload a snapshot of the final score like you say, but beyond that, I don't want to make people jump through hoops if we decide not to go with videos for our runs.
This is a very real problem with the community, and it's that there's not enough live competition. And when I say live, I don't mean sitting next to each other on stage. Competition.
Just active.
Yeah, active. That's a better word. There's not enough active competition, and there should be more content. I just want more content. The content is what drives the traffic. If there's anything I know about the nuts and bolts of the internet, the content drives the traffic. And if you don't have content, you don't have viewers. They don't even have a chance to show up because you don't have a video for them to watch. So right. I agree. There are some very real technical hurdles that might stand in the way of that.
Mm-hmm.
Community is already niche and struggling with other problems. Tackling problems is kind of how they get solved. Whatever. May as well try.
Yeah. And it might be a situation where we could just be more flexible in a game-by-game basis. So if it's a SNES UN Squadron, if you can get video, that's great, but maybe we won't require it, right? Like Battle Greg on PS4, I feel like should have video because the PS4 can capture the video for you. You don't have to do anything. And if all else fails, I am totally cool with people just pointing a camera at their screen, recording it with an iPhone or whatever, and uploading it that way. That's something at least,
if the game
right?
itself has a replay feature, you could just replay it and hold your phone for 25 minutes or whatever, and there you go.
Put your phone up on a shoe, hit record, and there you go. Or like, let's say you're playing a SNES. Old speedrunners used to do this back in the day. They would just record themselves playing it. They would record their attempts. They'd just put a camera up towards the screen or whatever and then play. And if they get the replay then they do. And if they don't, then they just delete the video and try again. So there's that too. That's an old school method. But, also too, just getting video from video games these days is getting a lot easier and a lot cheaper. So I don't feel it's like asking a whole lot, especially since the shmup community, we're so invested in these games already. If you're willing to spend 4 months getting a one-all of a game, I'm sure you're willing to spend a little bit of money or whatever you need to capture it,
Yeah, and my concern comes more from the very trailing edge of the newbies who might come into there. If they're not, just generally, if they're not familiar with capturing footage while also having to grapple with capturing footage, might turn them away, might not, because it might just as well say, oh, wow, I can capture this really easily and I'll get into it. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's the passion for the genre that will get people creating content. Like whether it's hard or it's easy, they'll find a way to record it. Maybe they just hold up their cell phone like you pointed out.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. Maybe what would be a better idea, good thing we're talking about this before I post it, is peer pressure encourage video. But it isn't completely required. If you want to just take a snapshot of the end screen, fine. But what hopefully will happen is that people will have video for their scores. And then there'll be like one score on the board that doesn't have a video and everyone just is kind of like, doesn't worry about that score, and then the guy who got it is like, hey, maybe I should redo or do another run and actually record it. Kind of like maybe more of a set the standard as video and hopefully everyone follows it. But if people don't, whatever, I guess.
You also mentioned because certain games have replay, on a per game basis, the focus initially should be the games that are known to have a record function and or are available on Steam. I mean, basically emphasize games that are fairly available to anyone who might want to try them. And you can say, hey, like if you're playing on PS4 or Xbox One, Here's a link to instructions on doing video recording. If you're playing this on PC through emulation or on Steam, here's the ways you can do recording. And then you eliminate the excuse, but you're also not making them jump through hoops because it's like, hey, this game's only available like by import to the Sega Saturn or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my idea. I've dominated this interview enough talking about it. I'm sure I have this whole document written up that I'll post on the forums. Please check it out. Hopefully we can get this going. My hope is that people listening to this, no matter your skill level, you're the best player in the world or a new player, you'll feel somewhat encouraged to go ahead and post a score on the ladder so that your peers can look at them and everyone can kind of interact with each other. That's the goal.
Participate. That sounds fun. I think it is the kind of thing that the community needs.